Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this planning meeting of the Melton Borough Council. I am Councillor Alan Thwaites, Chair of Planning, and just a little bit of housekeeping first. In the event of having to evacuate the council chamber, please leave by one of the 6 emergency exits around the sides of the chamber. Please assemble at the far side of the front car park nearest to the park entrance. Officers will be on hand to assist anyone who needs any assistance. Please put your phones to silent during this meeting. And we will be using the audio-visual system this evening, and the meeting will also be streamed live on YouTube. Members speaking, please raise your hands when you wish to speak and speak directly to the microphone in front of you. Remember to turn it off once you have finished. Members voting will be by raised hands. I'd like to introduce those present this evening. To my right, we have Councillor Siggy Atherton and Councillor Gordon. To my left, we have Councillor Mason, Glancy, Councillor Cumbers, Higgins, and Councillor Pritchett. We are waiting for Ian Atherton. If he arrives before we start the item, he'll be able to join. We also have a team of officers present who are to my left, Senior Solicitor Tom Pickwell. To my right, Planning Development Manager Louise Parker, Assistant Director of Planning Sarah Legg, Senior Planning Officer Andrew Cunningham. We also have our Democratic Services team present, assisting with the technology and taking the minutes. That's Adam Green and Sarah Evans. I'll first of all go through the apologies for absence. There's apologies for absence from Councillor Pip Olnut, and also apologies from Councillor Ronan Brown, who would have had a conflict of interest with the one item that we're discussing this evening. Onto the minutes, I would like to propose the amendments, which I think you all have copies of at this moment in time. Do I have a seconder for those? Councillor Higgins, thank you. Are there any other comments that anybody would like to make on the minutes? In that case, then, can I take a vote that we need to propose? Do you have a proposer? Councillor Higgins, do you have a seconder? Councillor Mason. Come and take a vote on the minutes. And that's unanimous. Thank you very much. Next, members to declare any interest as appropriate in respect of the items to be considered at this meeting. Do I have any declarations of interest? No. Right, onto the schedule of applications. Item 4.2 has been withdrawn from this evening's agenda to allow for further discussion with the agent on this matter, and it'll come at a later meeting. So therefore, we only have the one application tonight, which is application 22/00601/VAC, Lake Terrace, Melton Mowbray. And I think it's Andrew is the only one here tonight to actually make the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So this application relates to a variation of condition application in respect of a previous planning permission which approved 90 dwellings on land at Lake Terrace in Melton Mowbray. The site location plan, just for reference, is on the screen for yourselves. There are 2 aspects to this application which are sought for approval: a revised plan condition and a revised Section 106 agreement. Next slide, please. Thank you. So the first of which is on the screen, showing the permitted layout on the left-hand side and then the proposed layout on the right-hand side. It's a very small amendment which seeks a slightly increased private driveway. The parking spaces for plot 73 are now side by side instead of tandem, and a very small realignment of the non-adopted footpath, which is retained just to the north of those 2 parking spaces. These changes are considered to be acceptable in the context of the overall scheme. So the second aspect is in relation to the viability appraisal, which the applicant has submitted. So this development is a 100% affordable housing scheme, which is underpinned by a significant Homes England funding. It's worth noting that that funding by Homes England is based on a 100% affordable housing scheme. So if there is any percentage less than that, even sort of 1 unit, the scheme would not be viable as the Homes England funding would be withdrawn. As such, so it's not possible to trade off any percentage of that affordable housing to increase the Section 106 contributions in lieu of sort of reducing that provision. Next slide, please. Thank you. So this is an extract from the Developer Contributions Supplementary Planning Document. So occasionally, development proposals come forward which are highly desirable in their content, but which cannot achieve all of the contributions required to mitigate their impact upon infrastructure and facilities. Members will also be aware of the table within the SPD, which sort of goes just before this paragraph and sets out the prioritization of contributions where viability is being considered. It is the table and the SPD itself which has been considered in the determination of this application, as I'll take you on to the next slide just to sort of look at the specific detail of what we're considering. So on the left-hand side of the screen, we have the approved and the existing Section 106 agreement. Starting at the top, Strategic Highways Education. It was previously approved 40% on-site affordable housing, that being 36 dwellings out of the 90 units, as well as other infrastructure contributions as shown there. The middle column in respect of the priority, that is in relation to the priority setting table within the Developer Contributions SPD. So starting at the top, you have priority 1, followed by 2A, 2B, and then moving down to 2C and 3. The applicant now seeks, obviously, a development of 100% on-site affordable housing. The appraisal that the applicant submitted, it's just worth reiterating, tried to demonstrate that they couldn't pay any of the Section 106 contributions. However, the council instructed an independent viability consultant who disagreed with a number of sort of the factors of the applicant's report. They carried out their own viability appraisal, which confirmed that the scheme could economically provide £799,000, which you'll see on the top right-hand side of the screen. In line with those priorities set out in the Developer Contributions SPD, and in agreement with Leicestershire County Council, that £799,000 is to go towards priority 1, being strategic highways and education. There would still be a reduction from what was originally approved in the previous Section 106. It should also be recognised that LCC have taken a slightly different approach on this application by sort of the reduction in the priority 1, given the desirability of providing a 100% affordable housing scheme. Those contributions which sit sort of below that would fall away, so to healthcare, civic community, sustainable travel, libraries and monitoring. Next slide, please. So in summary, there's the significant benefit here in that the scheme is providing a 100% affordable housing scheme. That must be weighed heavily in the consideration of the application. Due to the Homes England funding, if any percentage of affordable housing was lower than 100%, the scheme would not be viable. And contrary to the applicant's appraisal, the council's independent assessment concluded that the scheme would still be able to provide £799,000 worth of contributions, and that is to be provided in line with the Developer Contributions SPD to education and strategic highways. And as such, the application is therefore recommended for approval, subject to the conditions and the proposed deed of variation set out in the report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Andrew. I'll just note that Councillor Ian Atherton joined the meeting, but I think it was early enough to allow participation, if that's okay with everyone. Yeah. So do any of the members have any questions for clarification from Andrew? Councillor Higgins.
Yeah, and can I, as I was away, just put my apologies in why I couldn't make the briefing. So if any of these questions had happened earlier, my apologies to colleagues and officers as well. But as this is also in the public debate, I think this would be quite healthy. I was the portfolio holder for the council when the developer contributions SPD went out for consultation, and worked with Alex Coy as it was coming together, and Jim Worley and Louise and the officers at the time. It was, I don't believe, and the question to the officers, that in the wording of the plan, that it sets out a cascade of priority, that the first priority, second priority, third priority, it must go from 100% funding until it goes to the next tier down. And when I asked the question as portfolio holder at the time, because I was concerned about that, and obviously in this part for health, and I'll leave that part for the debate. The reason being is,
is this a question for Andrew?
It is a question.
Part of the debate.
It is a question, and I'll just say this because I'm asking the question: where does it say in the SPD that the table has to follow all in 1 and none in 2 and 3 if it doesn't follow there? Because I don't believe it does in the SPD. What it does say at 3.3.6 at the very bottom, the prioritization approach will be on a case-by-case basis, as it would be dependent on the requested contributions submitted and the specific circumstance of the development proposed and the site's location and characteristics. And the characteristics are important here because it's affordable housing. Now, I'll leave that part to the debate, but unless I've missed something from the SPD, I don't believe it's ever pointed that it must all go into 1, then 2, then 3. But I believe it is prioritization where you do look to fund priority 1 first and give that the lion's share. But that doesn't mean that other important strategic elements such as health then get 0. And that's the question to the officers there for that clarity of that. I might have another question of officers as well, but just depends on what the answer is. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. So the developer contributions SPD obviously sets out where that table in terms of that prioritization. Those items marked as priority 1 are considered to be sort of essential. Just above, I think, where you've sort of read out 3.3.6, just before that, it talks about those in priority 1 should not be compromised in any readily foreseeable circumstance. So what's being provided here is the scheme has gone through a viability appraisal. It's found that £799,000 worth is available for Section 106. So the starting point is for that priority 1 infrastructure. So it wouldn't sort of trickle down to priority 2 at that point. It needs to sort of fill that priority 1 first. And I think it's worth also just pointing out that they're not providing the full amount for priority 1 as well. And that approach was agreed by LCC in their consultation response.
Yeah, the specific wording, it's not must or anything like that. It says, and as such is not envisaged that they can be compromised in any readily foreseeable circumstance. But obviously the latter paragraph, and this was checked with legal at the time, because the whole point is if over time we're not funding, and we'll just use healthcare for one, if we're not funding primary healthcare, that one will become unsustainable eventually. So at some stage we'll have to try and fund the priority 2s, and that's where I'm coming from on here. And so while I agree you would try and fund priority 1s, and bearing in mind that but it equally does say that it's case-by-case basis requested contributions, and it's site's location and characteristics. And characteristics are going to be really important in the debate, because I've got some points on that part as well. So just to be clear, it says in any readily foreseeable circumstance. Well, we've obviously not seen this circumstance. So foreseeable circumstance is totally different. And that's because really SPD document is meant to be that developers are meant to supply contributions to mitigate their whole thing. And that's why I don't believe the thrust of this, and it's certainly when I was portfolio holder, wasn't as this is being come across, that's all.
Any other questions for clarification? Councillor Cumbers.
Sorry, I too wasn't able to make the briefing because I had another meeting. But one thing, and perhaps this was answered at the briefing, all these things were promised. It was a windfall site, and there were lots of things which were, or sort of promised that they agreed to pay because it was a windfall site, and that really sort of ensured they got the planning permission. So why did they consider that these things were viable when they got the planning permission, and what has changed to make it not viable now?
Thank you, Chair. So yes, the scheme was permitted back in, I think it was 2018. That was on the original section 106, which was on the screen, and detailed the contributions that were requested by the consultees at that point, and they were secured in the section 106. This application is for a 100% affordable housing development, so it's underpinned by that Homes England funding. So if that were to go away, the scheme wouldn't be viable. It's gone through the independent assessment. They carried out their own appraisal, so we haven't sort of just examined the applicants. They've carried out their own appraisal based on the figures and the values and sort of the assumptions that go into carrying out that work, and that's why it's come up with the £799,000 figure.
Sorry, but what has changed? What in particular? Like, I mean, if something, the market have fallen away for housing or something, we might have an understanding. So what has changed that all these things could be afforded when they got planning permission and can't be afforded now? No, if you don't know, you don't know.
So that would all be detailed within the viability assessment that was submitted with the application. Obviously, they're quite complex documents and quite detailed documents, but that's all been assessed through the council's independent assessor that we instructed. So there was a number of sort of work that they undertook to assess sort of local sort of build costs and, you know, sort of everything that goes into understanding and assessing a viability appraisal. So that's something that the work that the council's independent assessor would have done, which then feeds into where we've got to the outcome to date.
I don't think that's a proper answer, but I think I'm going to have to be, I'm stuck with it. Thank you.
So Higgins.
My apologies to officers again, but through Pat's question has prompted my other question. As Councillor Cumbers has rightly said, this is a windfall site. So when the Melton local plan was envisaged, this site wasn't there. So the question to the officers is thus: as this is a windfall and strategic road infrastructure is getting a windfall amount, it obviously, if this site didn't come as windfall, the strategic road still would have been built, but it wouldn't have had this money. But healthcare, houses still would rely on primary healthcare. They have to rely on primary healthcare. So for strategic road, that is a windfall. For education and healthcare, because it will produce children and will produce demand on healthcare, that to me, and that's why I'm going back to case by case basis, because this wasn't in the local plan. And so when we were trying to look at the viability for the relief road, this wouldn't have ever been considered. So why for strategic road infrastructure, it's windfall. And so why is it going that way and then not to essential services like health?
Sarah?
Thank you, Councillor Higgins. So whether the site is an allocated site or a windfall site, there are still issues to be mitigated as part of its permission. So back in 2017, when the application was originally submitted, that evidence came in and the development would create a need to be mitigated on the highway. So that requires a highway contribution. And in the same respect, if the houses aren't there, then there isn't a need to mitigate the highway impact either. So whether it's a windfall or not, there is still a demand on the highway network that needs to be met. And I think it's worth remembering that when the MMDR North and East scheme was initially considered, the cost was in the region of about £74 million. And since it's now being constructed, the cost is more in the region of £120 million. So there is a huge gap to fill. regardless of whether there is this windfall site or not, that can't be mitigated by development in Melton alone.
And that is a really good point. And while I understand that, but because it says strategic road infrastructure, that then indicates it's to the bypasses. Am I right in that? Yes. So thank you. Where if so the bypass would still have come about from the southern urban extension and the northern urban extension. It wouldn't have relied on this £600,000. Though I do respect costs have gone up, but costs have gone up for all authorities who rely on Section 106 agreements, including health and other amenities. Is my point and question.
Thank you. Yes, and I think it's also worth just reminding members of the suite of documents that this council signed up to at the end of 2021 that was alongside this developer contributions SPD, basically to support the county council in making this significant investment into Melton Mowbray. So as well as the developer contributions SPD, the council also entered into a contract to pay the county council for the Melton South. Whilst there's some debate over that because of the situation around Melton South, it also formed part of additional work that was done at the time in terms of master planning those developments and that firm commitment to the county council. And that was the key driver behind that developer contributions SPD, to give them the confidence to continue to support that distributor road, that the council would ensure that they had their developer contributions for strategic highways.
Okay, just one more.
Don't have a question here, but thank you, Sarah. I just want to be very, very clear. I'm not trying to play the highways off against other providers, but what I'm just saying is it's potentially making that the thing unviable. I'll bring that into the debate if that's okay, because I don't have another question on it. Thank you,
Councillor Glancy.
Thank you. Yes, I've got two questions, but they'll be fairly quick. The first one is, did we have conversations with Highways about the amount that we had available, and did we negotiate with them to see if they would accept slightly less? We could allow ICB to have the 28,000, which is probably 3.5% of the 799,000 available. And the second question is, did we also negotiate with the developer to alter the affordable housing mix, because there's more money for the developer and Section 106 in affordable housing, which is for shared ownership as opposed to straight renting? I'd just like an answer to those two questions, please, because there's lots of different ways that we perhaps could have manoeuvred ourselves through this sort of quandary we're in. And I'm not saying you haven't done a good job, but I just want those questions answered.
Thank you, Chair. So I'll take them in reverse order, if that's okay. So in terms of the housing tenure, there's unlikely to be a significant additional sort of input to the Section 106 contributions as a result of changing that tenure. However, it's worth noting that if there is any additional surplus, that would be captured at the late stage review mechanism that's been incorporated into the 106. But it would still go to priority one in the first instance, being education and highways, which I think is about £260,000 worth that they're short of. In terms of the highways figure, again, there was a lot of discussions with LCC during the course of this application, and that's what they have provided as their sort of split in terms of providing a certain element to education, certain element to strategic highways. And I think, as I said in the presentation, that they've taken a slightly different approach on this one, given the desirability of the scheme coming forward as 100% affordable housing, and that it needs to be 100% affordable housing. Otherwise, that Homes England funding would disappear. If that Homes England funding disappeared, then the scheme wouldn't be viable at all.
But you haven't answered my question. Did you negotiate with Highways? Did you mention that we have another area that requires funding to make this more viable? Did you actually mention that to highways, or was it a case of, well, here's the money and highways just want the whole shebang?
Thank you, Chair. So there was quite detailed discussions with LCC. We sort of provided them copies of our viability report, but it sort of goes back to the fact that the SPD does set out the prioritisation for priority 1, then priority 2, and priority 3. So that's where those discussions led to, and that they were aware of obviously the other contributions within the Section 106 because they signed up to it. So they were fully aware of sort of everything else that's being considered.
Councillor.
Yes, it's really to add on to what Councillor Cumbers said. And one of the reasons, I'm not saying it is a reason to make it less viable. Could it be?
Or is this a question for
yes,
the
it is.
Okay.
Oh, well, I believe it is. Let's put it that way. It's just adding on to Councillor Cumbers' question. And could it have been some sort of delay so that they didn't start the building as early as they could, making the costs go up? And that's made it less viable. Could that be one of the reasons? I'm not saying it is, but could it be?
Thank you. So we wouldn't know anything about sort of when the applicants are starting to build or anything like that. We've just got to consider what's here in front of us and the fact that they've submitted this application, the viability assessment, and we've gone through that process of instructing an independent assessor to look at that, carry out their own appraisal, and result in sort of the considerations that we've sort of presented in the presentation earlier.
Any other questions for clarification? No. Thank you. So in that case, then I'd like to open the debate. Would anybody like to start the debate? We have a recommendation to accept, but would anybody like to debate? Councillor Cumbers.
Yeah, one of the other things which was promised by the applicant was having a section of Lake Terrace to be adopted, properly adopted. It was owned by the council, but it was going to be made into a proper road, and that would be a cost of 150,000. So it looks as though that won't happen as well. And that was not just a good thing for the council, but it would help the Biffa site and everything else. And as well, there was a ransom strip that needed to be part of this development, part owned by this council, part owned by the county council, you know, and so because of all the stuff that was going to be gained by this council, and this council and the county council bent over backwards, I think, to sort of help this application go through. That's just a comment. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure what that relates to, but it sounds like some sort of developer uplift clause, whereby if a developer develops land, they pay an uplift on having purchased the land. That's a private law matter. So yes, it may have been the council that were the other party to that, but it sits outside of the planning remit, and the relevance of that is that would still happen. If that is the case, that there is some sort of uplift or overage agreements in place, there will be a legally binding document that requires that. So that shouldn't be lost if there is such a thing. I don't know. I'm not commenting on that because I don't know. But if there is something like that, then that would sit separate and would be legally enforceable.
Thank you very much for that. I'm cynical. I think it will be lost.
Councillor Higgins.
Yeah, and thank you to the officers for responding to the questions. And it is a very complex part. So I'd like to first of all just put on record the proposal for the variation condition. I'm more than fine with that. So that's not. I am struggling with the second part, and I'll come to it. But I'd like to thank the officers for the challenge of the Section 106, because I think if it was left unchallenged and then was come to the committee, I certainly think a huge refusal would have come in on that because of the viability. That's a bit of speculation, but I'm struggling with even securing 799 of Section 106. That said, the reason for my thoughts on this, and I want members to consider this, and this is why I don't think I can support that part of the proposal at this stage, because obviously with the ICB and primary healthcare, all houses will rely on primary healthcare. Not all houses have a child in education, or necessarily would across the borough would use a particular road. That's all said, but everybody relies on primary healthcare. And when we look at the characteristics of this application, and it is a shame that the applicant hasn't engaged their 3 minutes so we could ask those kind of questions, is this is affordable housing. So the income for the new tenants and residents of this community are going to be on lower incomes, which, and while this is very generalized, is how I'm saying, would tend to rely probably on the healthcare services more than everything else. It is a very viable point, Mr. Chair, unless you were going to ask me a question, but.
Well, can I ask you a question? Because I think
Yeah.
were you going to say that they will use their health system more than other demographics?
Potentially, yes. Depending.
So should we also, as part of the debate, should we, where it's a 5-bedroom, £700,000 house, reduce? All I'm saying is, I think when the figures were the roof, I forget what the exact term is, roof tax for the ICB was considered, that was across the whole demographic. So picking out one particular part is difficult to pick it out from another part. Yeah.
And that's a reasonable challenge. What I'm saying is in these 90 houses, they're with 100% affordable. They're going to be of people of lower incomes. That all said, the mix, and I think where Councillor Glancy was asking the question there, of 42 shared ownership, 48 affordable rent. If it was mixed up more, and as the independent assessor says, increases the viability, it could just give just a few thousand to the ICB. And equally, but from memory, because when I was I was a big advocate of this site when I was the portfolio holder, and I had discussions with the NCHA at the time. And what they also is they've got on the, I believe, of the affordable rent, some are for tenants who are going to be in work benefits and some who will be out of work benefits. Now, I don't want to talk about necessarily who or may occupy those, but those on out of work benefits could be either the retired or potentially people who couldn't work for various reasons, could be for mental or physical reasons. And as the ICB acknowledges, that would rely more on primary healthcare. So it could create more demand on primary healthcare. So that's why the characteristic of this particular application is important. And if you want to.
No, it's difficult to actually start that argument, because that opens up a whole new different set of arguments that are more expensive houses should pay less. It has been worked out, and it's part of the standard agreement that what we pay for the roof tax per house that's built.
Well, that's a view. It's not a view I share, but that's a particular view, because obviously, if you're having a whole population of, when you're doing the Melton local plan, you're going to have 5-bedroom houses and 2-bedroom houses as well. That said, this one is about this application, and it's the merits of this application I'm looking at, and the characteristics of this application, and then not to contribute to anything to healthcare, I think is a real problem. And we've got to make sure not to play off other developers' contributions to other providers. But if we are, as members, not going to support the ICB to help primary healthcare access to primary healthcare, that is a real problem. And the issue will be is people who then come to the town, either to set up home or live here, will struggle to get GP access. And that is a huge, huge concern.
Can I bring Sarah in just to answer the question better than I did?
No, well, that's fine. Yeah. If I can just finish the point. So that's why I believe the characteristics of this is why we should make sure that the ICB get some contribution. And when we look at prioritisation, just going on this point, the council has many priorities. One of the main priorities that it has, but it doesn't mean that it funds all its priority 1 and none to priority 10, for example. It splits its cake accordingly, but it can't always meet all the demands, but it still does other things. And that's where I believe this SPD also needs to reflect. And if we refuse this site, that will also mean, which is not a very good reason to refuse it, but that would also mean that our partners with Leicestershire County Council will lose windfall for highways contribution. So they will get zero when really they're getting, how much is it? For highways, they're getting a windfall. So they're getting something more than they would have expected. But equally, that's why I think for a very small amount of thousands of pounds, the ICB make a very good reason why we need primary healthcare to be funded.
Thank you, Councillor Higgins. I mean, just before I hand over to Sarah, I would say you need to look at there is another side to that as well, which is this is 90 affordable houses in the town, which is we desperately need. So just pass on to Sarah. Yeah.
Thank you. I think at this point, I do need to remind members that the Developer Contributions SPD is an adopted document by this council. It went for public consultation and was then adopted by the council. It is a material consideration in the development plan. So you must apportion weight to the detail within that SPD. That priority table is not about us not supporting the ICB, but it is about this council's firm commitment to support the county council in the delivery of the strategic infrastructure to support all housing delivery in Melton Mowbray, as well as employment land. Looking at essentially trying to trade off is not possible and is not in the spirit of that Developer Contributions SPD. And I think where you're looking at that sentence in paragraph 3.3.6 of the SPD. So it should be noted that priority one infrastructure may not be relevant for all developments, especially in rural areas. And then it goes on to say the prioritisation approach will be on a case-by-case basis, dependent upon requested contributions submitted, the specific circumstance of the development proposed on the site's location and characteristics. That is not to do with essentially taking money away from primary care or the ICB. That is to do with the specific geography of the site. So for instance, where you have a site in a rural location in the borough, you don't need to mitigate impacts on the strategic road network. The impacts on education may also be different, and that is what that paragraph was written for. Further down into paragraph 3.3.7 is where you get that further information about where there may be proportioning of contributions across priorities 2A, B and C, but not, it doesn't specify, not across priority 1, but that is in that. So it is important to remember that we cannot trade off essentially between those two. Any additional money that is found at a late stage review would firstly be allocated to the County Council for strategic highways and education purposes. And that was per that table that Andrew showed you on his presentation. And we do need to remember that although the County Council isn't getting actually everything that it wanted to, we would be getting 90 affordable homes in the town.
Councillor Higgins.
Thank you. Just on 3.3.7, it does say proportioning may see a reduction of all priority. So that's a may. And as you say, it was silent on that. That all said, and I'll just say here, I'm really struggling. I think this is a great site. It's great to have 90 affordable housing. There's probably no one in the borough who promotes affordable housing other than myself, and that's why I've been an advocate of this particular site. I'm not comfortable that with zero to the ICB, zero money, and I've not heard from NCHA. I've not heard anything like that where they could look to support the primary healthcare. I'm not comfortable to vote for it at this moment in time. And I'll just say, while I acknowledge what the officer was saying, the thrust when I was portfolio holder wasn't when the SSPD was going through, and I know what subsequently was, and it is important to support highways and education. And again, I'm on record of supporting education all the way through, and I'm not even mentioning that against the ICB. It doesn't mean that the thrust is we have to fund priority 1 to 100%, and all priority 2s get zero. It never was intended for that. And that's my point. Thank you.
Councillor Mason.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to say I have a huge amount of respect for the opinion and huge and even more sympathy for the outlook that's been proposed by Councillor Higgins. But this seems to me that this application has morphed from outline planning into a position where there's 100% affordability, 100% affordable homes on the site. We've gone from zero developer contributions to £700,000 worth of developer contributions. I suspect that if we were to tinker with the application, that the whole application would collapse and we would lose the whole of the site. Would I be right in thinking that's where we're coming from?
Louise?
Yes, that's exactly right. So what you've got before you is a negotiated position through examination of information, evidence, and its viability, etc. What you've got now is a product which we are recommending support of due to the affordable housing element, which is something that we don't get all the time. We have assessed that and weighted that as a huge benefit and consideration in this scheme. There is a possibility that the only other thing that would come forward is a scheme with no affordable housing, no infrastructure, no contributions, no anything at all. And I would suggest that is a real risk here to members.
Councillor Cumbers?
Thanks for that. Sorry, I've lost my thread a bit, my neighbour. But if sorry, can you listen to? I'll come back to mine.
Okay, Councillor Higgins.
I'm going to make a proposal in a pragmatic. If Councillor Atherton wants to go first, I'm going to make a proposal, and then obviously. So if Councillor.
Okay, I'll go to Councillor Siggy Atherton, and then Councillor Pritchett is also wishing to talk.
I think the bottom line is this: we either vote yes, we get affordable housing and the money goes to highway and education, or we say no and we end up with nothing. I think that's really the bottom line, if I understand correctly. Yes.
Councillor Pritchett.
Much, Chair. I'm crystal ball gazing on what's developing on this. Is that wouldn't it put us in a difficult position as a precedent for each and every application that comes forward in the future? That, in other words, we've got a set of rules, but on this occasion we're going to vary them, and I'm a little bit concerned about making those decisions as we go along when we've had quite a clear governing documents.
So just to clarify, you're saying you don't want to vary. You think we should stick by the rules, the SPD rules. I was just which side of the line you were there.
Well, what I'm saying is, before there haven't been any proposals yet, I'm just sort of crystal ball gazing whilst I'm listening to it, that you're going to get into this position for each and every application that comes forward. You know, and I don't think I'm very clear and comfortable about that. That's what I'm saying.
Thank you. Councillor Cumbers.
Yeah, and just to say, of course they can come back. This was a windfall site. It's not in the plan. There's no reason why the council would have to support anything there. But I would hope that if it were refused, that they would come back with something which was more related to what was proposed when they got their actual planning permission.
Louise?
Yeah, I think it's important to remember here that we've got an outline permission, we've got a reserve matters application, we've got everything kind of packaged up here, and this 106 element will sit alongside that permission that's in place. I think there's been some really important points raised with regards to Councillor Pritchett especially, and the comment regards to making changes under different circumstances. Can I remind members, you've got an adopted Melton local plan, you've got an adopted SPD in place as well, you've got a very firm framework to follow.
You can try. And I would just advise members that you follow the adopted plan, the adopted SPD, and decisions in line with the framework. Else we end up in quite dangerous territory, to be honest.
So Ian Atherton.
Thank you, Chair. It concerns me to a degree that the original request for planning permission was put forward in 2017, albeit not permitted until late 2018. And here we are in 2023, some 5 years later, discussing the financial viability of the site, given the changes in costs and everything else. It strikes me that in this particular application, and there are others that are similar, that it just feels like we're being held to ransom by a delay on behalf of the developer. If the developer had gone ahead and started building at the point the original application was agreed, we wouldn't be in this position now. Granted, we wouldn't have the quantity of affordable houses, and for that change, I think we are all very grateful, but we would have had the funds in terms of 106 contributions across the board that were originally agreed. I don't know what we can do about speeding up the process of getting from outline planning permission to building started, but it concerns me greatly that just about every planning meeting I've been to, we've been asked to reduce the amount of contribution to the council for health, for schools, for all kinds of things, primarily caused by delay in building.
Thank you. Councillor Gordon.
Yeah, I'm just going to change it slightly from what we've been talking about. For the 10.3 that's in here, it says to promote the use of sustainable modes of transport. I was wondering, I mean, I think it might be too late now, if there can be a cycle route from the site to go to Assenby Road, that would be so beneficial. If it is too late, which I'm assuming it is, if we could make the suggestion to the applicant.
Andrew.
Thank you. So that all of those, I think you mentioned 10.3, which is, I think, the conditions of the previous permission, which has just been carried forward to this recommendation. So you wouldn't be able to sort of open up anything that's already been agreed. It would have had to have already been agreed at that outline stage or the previous permission.
Yes, carry on, Councillor.
Thank you. Yeah, could you not make this suggestion to them though, just to see if there could be something that could be done? I mean, they might just do it, as something to help out, the site, for instance, especially as it's going to be affordable housing as well. It might be beneficial for all concerned.
I think as the applicant is probably in the room, you maybe have already done that. So can I ask anybody else? Councillor Higgins?
Yeah, so I'm going to make a proposal. I'm going to try and keep it as pragmatic from listening from other members, because I also want to see this site developed, as I say. So I'm going to propose a permit on the variation of the condition. Get that one out of the way. But from the revised viability assessment, I'm happy to throw my vote behind a permit if, and this way I say, I'm happy to put this into your hands, maybe the portfolio holder, for NCHA, the agent, and maybe Homes England or whatever, just to have that one more chat and to see if, with the ICB, to try and get, say, even 50% of what they requested, because 75 is going to windfall to highways and education. And I think just a contribution to the ICB, I think, is so vital for the people of Melton and the future residents of this great development. So I'm going to, if okay, I might need some help, propose permit. But that part gets negotiated in consultation with yourself and maybe the portfolio holder.
I was just going to say, just wanted to check that was legally viable or first.
I think the difficulty is it's a bit ambiguous exactly what the proposal is.
Okay, well,
So we just need to be explicit in exactly what that looks like.
okay, well, as the proposer, so I'm going to propose permit, but then for everything that's in there, keep education the way it is, because I'm happy with that. I'm happy with the windfall for highways, and happy with that, because highways are getting something for nothing, and that's great. But it's got to have that extra, see if we can have one more go to find, it's hardly any money at all. And whether NCHA can just swap a little bit of the viability about, just to try and get an amount, and if you want me to be specific, I'll say £20,000 to the ICB, which is less than 75%.
I think the confusion I'm having is it almost feels more of a deferment type thing, to defer it to go
I'm
away.
happy to
and-
defer, but I'm
well,
trying to be pragmatic as well.
Sorry, no, that's not me. I advise you to defer. But that's almost what it sounds, because the suggestion is that it's permit subject to something, but then if that doesn't happen, or well, that would be a deferral. Then wouldn't it? It wouldn't be a
No. So
permit.
I'm proposing permit, and if the chair with officers and say the portfolio holder secure that commitment from NCHA for the ICB, it goes through, doesn't come back to committee. If it fails, it comes back to committee for rather. Otherwise, if I defer it, they go and have a chat. It still comes back, even if they agree it. We have done this before.
Then I'll probably come
Yeah.
in.
I think we just need to be really clear here. Okay, so if there is any additional funding found or any further money, that priority one is LCC. So any short, just bear with me 1 second, please, Councillor Higgins. So any shortfall would go to the county council. That is our priority list. That is our SPD. However, what I'm hearing is your commitment to talk to the ICB to find the money for it. And I understand that absolutely. The applicant's here in the room. He's listening to this conversation. Is there anything that can be done outside of the planning, shall we say? Because what we need to remember here is we're here for a planning decision at a planning committee, and we've got our policies in place, we've got our SPD in place, none of which allows for any negotiation to change something to then go through to the ICB. I just wonder if there is a discussion that can be had outside of the planning forum, perhaps, whether that may assist you in your in your motion. Sorry,
I don't understand that, because while we do have policies and an SPD, I don't quite agree with the thrust of where the officers have gone with it, but that's a different thing. Equally, I've got to look in the entire round, and as a decision maker, which through law, that's where I'm going through the proposal to permit this, subject to a conversation and delegate with the chair of planning to speak with the ICB, the applicant, to try and secure an amount for the ICB. And if we're going to go on a particular value, let's go for 70%, which is less than highways.
Yeah. Sorry, my confusion is, so what happens if that is not successful to reach that £20,000? Then what happens? But that's a deferral then. That's not, we can't make the decision and then sort of say we would bring it back if we did.
No, subject to. So no, I'm really confused, because I've been on the planning committee for a number of years, and officers have known that we've done this several times over, where we have deferred something to the planning chair because we weren't happy with one or two particular items, and I don't understand why I have to keep repeating myself on this. So my proposal is permit, subject to that, through delegating to the planning chair, that a conversation is had to try and extract that funding of, as I've said, 70% of the request for the ICB. And so I'm going to stick my line in the sand for 70%, which is less than highways and education, so less of a priority for highways and education. And if those negotiations fail, then it comes back. And I think then it's going to be important, and I know, as Councillor Atherton said, if they want to get building, then for a few £1,000s, let's just crack on with it and fund the ICB. So that's where I'm trying to get it to, if that's okay.
Yeah, please don't take it. I disagree with everything you're saying. You know, I don't. But I just want to pass on to Sarah.
Thank you, Chair. So if, and that's a very big if, the applicant and or Homes England can find that additional £20,000, it isn't just a conversation with the ICB, it's a conversation back with the County Council, because they have first dibs on that money. So if you can just let me
That's not my
finish.
proposal, though. With all due respect, that isn't my proposal. My proposal is to keep highways, which they've agreed that amount. As I say, I'm trying to get it where we've got to find funding for primary healthcare in this town, and so that's my proposal, and that's the end of it. If it passes, great. If it doesn't, then I've tried to and get.
Can I pass
primary
back to
healthcare.
Sarah to answer again?
Thank you, Chair. So highways and education, so the County Council have only agreed to this and not objected because they have checked that viability assessment and concur with the findings of it. So if there's another £20,000 found, they have first dibs on that money according to our SPD and how it is understood in terms of the agreement with them. So we have to bring them back into that conversation.
I'm
bringing Councillor Cumbers. She was waiting.
Can I propose a deferment? We've got the applicant sitting here.
No, there's already a motion on the table. So yeah.
Proposal. So I've made a proposal, and if my proposal is passed by the committee and then it succeeds, the permission is granted. And LCC haven't lost anything. No one else has lost anything. The ICB is the only one that's gained because I've given a motion to permit. So that ends it. If the applicant meets my criteria, that ends it. That's otherwise, like we say, if we defer it. So that is my proposal. So I'd like to see if there's a seconder, and let's just test it to the vote.
Councillor Mason.
If it does come back, let's say that's passed and it comes back, what will I look at that point when it comes back?
Yeah, quick question to Tom, because again, the point I'm confused about is how does it come back? If we've already permitted, how does it come back?
Yeah, sorry. So where I'm now coming from is almost a governance point of view, and I'm looking to Adam to assist with this. But it's how we return it. So I completely understand the delegation to the chair to do something, but it's how we return a motion to the committee if that doesn't work. And I don't know that there's a mechanism to do that.
It's really similar to this one because we've already given this permission and they couldn't find the section 106. It's come back to committee. If they found the section 106, it'd have just gone through. We wouldn't be here. So that's the mechanism I'm relying on. If that makes sense, I don't know.
Yeah, so the reason it's come back is because there's the section 73 application, but ignoring that part for a moment, it's effectively an application for viability. So the applicant has asked for it to come back. If you made a decision that was, say, to refuse it, that doesn't compel the applicant to put a new application in to come back. So the difficulty is how we can get that application to come back. If members want the application to come back for further information to be reviewed, assessed, then my legal advice would be to suggest a deferment for that purpose. The difficulty is, obviously, there are risks with deferment, the same risk that I always warn you about. But I think from a governance point of view, I'm not sure that you can get the application back here once you've passed a motion. And I think that's not what you want. I think what you want is, if it doesn't work, is you want it back before members. And I don't think there's a mechanism to do that unless Adam's got any ideas.
Any other? Councillor Mason.
I think it's a balance of risk that I'm coming to terms with. It is £28,000. On that balance, are we liable to lose 90 houses and £800,000 worth of contractors and development contributions? Should we defer it, or should we certainly, if we turned the application down? And the balance of risk is, I think we should approve it and accept the 90 houses and accept the £800,000 worth of developer contributions, because I think on the balance of risk, that's the right way to go.
I'm going to, because I think there might be a deferment coming up after. So I'm going to, so just listening to the legal advice, so I'm sure we've done this before, and I can't, but because as I say, I'm sure we've done this time and time before, where we've given a permit, tried to delegate one or two things to the chair, usually to the chair, and then if that negotiation has broken down, it has come back. I'm sure I've been on many meetings on that before. So I will take your advice on that, because I think just reading the room, but you don't want to give your hand away too easily. And that's why I'm just trying to hold the feet to the fire for primary healthcare, because it's so important. So I've got a proposal on the table, but if the officers are recommending a deferment, then I'll go with that one as well. But I do think I'm trying to find a pragmatic way through it. And I think this whole thing about risk for 90 houses, I don't think for the sake of a few weeks, we're going to lose the whole application within one meeting.
Can Tom just clarify something before I come back to you?
Yeah. So just to clarify, I'm not advising that you do defer it. I think my advice is that if you want this to come back before members, that a deferral would be a more sensible way, because once you make a decision, that decision is made. There isn't anything to come back. So if you want something back, then that would need to be. So for further information, for further discussion, then I would suggest a deferment is the way forward. That's not to say that I'm advising on this application you defer the matter.
Sorry, can you turn your microphone on? But
we're still on the proposal. That's what I'm saying. We keep slipping back into debate, and I'm trying to work away. So I think for the sake of one meeting, for the sake of a few weeks, because I think, bearing in mind the strategic importance not only to this council, and it's a corporate priority to help find the ICB, is just to try that one more time and have them round the table, because I don't believe they've actually been round the table from reading their response to the consultation. I don't believe they were involved. I think
but can I sort of say that we've already answered the question that if any more money is negotiated, the SPD says it goes into priority one.
Okay. I think
so anything that has to sit outside of that.
That's a point of view. I don't subscribe to that. And I think while Councillor Pritchett did say precedents, we're also then making a precedent that primary healthcare will get no funding if we keep having this, and that will cause other issues. So if there is no way of bringing it back, and I'm trying to find a pragmatic way where just a quick chat, I would have thought, could between the applicant and yourself as chair. And if it doesn't work, then bring it back. If it does work, just
as I understand it, the only way that can happen is if it's a deferment. Can we just get the views of some other people as well, and we'll come back?
Yeah, and then if okay, then because we've got to find either continue my proposal, or we've got to I'll change it. But I'm trying to find a pragmatic way, Chair.
I understand, and I absolutely agree with you about the importance of the ICB, and making sure that we fund the health system. But Councillor Atherton.
Thank you, Chair. Just a point of clarification on the end-to-end process. Should we accept the motion as currently proposed, or indeed as looking to be amended? Am I right in thinking that downstream there is still a chance to reassess all the figures based on actual prices? So there is a chance in the process anyway to look at the contributions and reassess and perhaps divvy it up in a slightly different way, either in compliance with the SPD or in negotiations with the people who might be in receipt of said monies. But there is another opportunity to look at the contributions downstream anyway.
And my understanding is that would need, again, as we say, following the SPD, that it would need to be more than 270,000 or whatever it is before it could actually get where the funding would actually then start to feed the health system.
Right, but I guess that from a procedural point of view, the point I was trying to put across is there is another point at which we get to review the contributions anyway, either up or down based on actual market values at the time.
Yeah, so you're correct in what you're saying. The late stage review mechanism, I think, is what you're referring to. Yeah, so that will be included. So once more of the costs are known, and as matters progress, there's then an opportunity to have a look at those revised figures, see what the situation is, and if there is any additional funding that would be kind of taken into consideration and further viability. The point remains the same though, whereby those priorities kick in and anything additional would have to go through that kind of hierarchy as to where that money would go. But yes, you're correct, there is a further point at which figures would be reviewed.
Councillor Pritchett.
Thank you very much, Chair. Just 2 points quickly. On a point Councillor Ian Atherton raised earlier about being penalised for delay, it's quite normal for a few years to pass from the original application to doing it. What the problem has been the inflation of the last few years rather than the developer. The second point is, as a retired NHS employee and somebody who maintains an interest in local healthcare, I can fully understand the issue, and particularly with the circumstances with the practice in Melton. However, what I am seeing, what I'm interpreting that they want to move the goalposts after the SPD prioritisation has been agreed, and the other document, which quite clearly put the road was king, and now you're trying to, it was approved by council, and you're now trying to say, well, actually, we don't agree with that. We think we want to uplift healthcare. So I'm rather terribly uncomfortable about this process.
So Higgins.
I just nodded to Tom. So just a question. So if I do the permit, but it's in specific that 70% of is found for the ICB. If it failed, so imagine it wasn't this application. So imagine we give various motions that any applications permitted, and obviously this is learning for us in future, because and say one of those points hadn't been achieved by the applicant, I would have thought then the permission can't go through. Am I right in that? So what my particular point is, for the applicant, with consultation of officers and the chair, secure 70% of what the ICB have asked for. And if they don't do that, then my permit, it hasn't been achieved. Because surely we've had other permits where we set conditions out in the motions, the recommendations, and if one of those recommendations hasn't been met, it then has failed. So then it comes back, and that's where I'm trying to work that out. If not, I'll listen to Tom, and then I'll decide what my proposal is, if that's okay. Because I know we're going around in circles, and I'd like to thank members and officers for their patience as well, and the applicant.
Okay, so sorry if I've misunderstood this, because I possibly have. So I think what you are suggesting is, if you made a recommendation to permit with all of the education and the highways that's in the report, and then an additional amount of X for the health authority, and then they can't provide that, would it come back? Is that the question? The difference is, so yes, ordinarily that's how it would really work at the earliest stage. I think the difficulty is you've got a viability assessment in front of you that's told you what that ceiling price is. The local authority, I think, have been quite pragmatic in the approach here in having those late stage review mechanisms. And what that does is it allows that later review to take place once a lot of the unknowns become known. But because you already have that now, to require something that's above and beyond that, I think it's probably quite unreasonable. So whilst viability probably isn't liked, I think is a fair thing to say, it is a mechanism that exists within the planning regime in the UK. And I think that's what makes this difficult.
Okay, right. What, and this is maybe for the applicants, is if you change some of the makeup of those shared ownership, more shared ownership and less affordable rent, the viability as set out in the report, there's more money in the game. And I don't think there needs to be that much more money in the game for this to be really great. So And that's where I think maybe that chat could really work within a few weeks, because the next planning app meeting has got to be in January.
I think the problem I'm having with this is the fact that we have a set of rules to reach where you're asking for is about 400k difference from where we are now, which is unlikely. And I as I said before, I fully understand your sentiments behind this, but we have a set of rules, and I don't think we can actually vary that set of rules. As unfortunate as they are, and we need to look at ways of maybe modifying that in the future, but I don't know how.
Okay, well that's not my interpretation of the SPD, but and if you read it as an entirety, that's why I don't agree with that approach, and I'm trying to find my foundational. So Tom, as I've presented that, do you think it would work to come back? And if not, then I'm going to have to go for a deferment and see where it, because we're going to have to move this proposal on, because it's either going to go through or it's not.
No, is the short answer, because what you would be doing is you would be permitting effectively with conditions or requirements that the applicant will say they cannot do. I assume they would be able to appeal that, because what would happen is if they refuse to enter into the Section 106 agreement to require that, we wouldn't grant the planning permission, and therefore if we didn't grant the planning permission, that gives them an avenue to appeal on that basis. I think, if I'm being honest, that is probably the route they would be more likely to take, and then to try in front of an inspector rather than do that. So the short answer is no, I don't think that would work.
One your microphone, but we have got a couple of other speakers that we wish to talk. Sorry, Karen.
So I'm going to withdraw the proposal to permit. I'm going to go for the deferment, because I still think, and one of the reasons, because obviously we get viewed, and members of the public need to know we're also on their side for healthcare. So the reason is I'm going to defer. I think for the next meeting, I don't want it to go on any longer than that, but I really, really want NCHA, their agent, with the ICB and yourself, Chair, because I know, and there's just a few things which, just with a little bit of ingenuity, we've done this before, just tweaking that little bit extra, but it has to go to the ICB, and that's my deferment. So any money found, and I just think just a few thousand to the ICB, and I'd like it to come back by the next planning app meeting, and that's my proposal to defer, and then I'll shut up. But thanks, members.
Councillor Cumbers, before I look for a second. Yeah.
So now we've got a proposal to defer, and I'm happy to second that. And we've got the applicant who's listening. He can see that we're really sort of keen on the advantages here. The new housing, there's huge support for that. But I would hope that he can bend a little bit, and so I'm happy to second deferment, for more conversation.
Just before I come back from that, Councillor Mason, you were waiting to talk.
Thank you. I can just say, Chair, any money that is found from whatever source has to be outside the planning round. Otherwise, it goes back in the court. It has prioritised again in accordance with SPD. Is that correct? So the money has to be found outside the planning round, and therefore, what is the purpose of the chair of planning and the portfolio holder within that debate around finding extra funds for the health community?
That would concur with my understanding that it couldn't be within because it would just go into the coffers of LCC. But just want to, does that confirm? That's correct. Yeah. For Councillor Higgins, what would you?
I still would like that deferment to see there, and if obviously other people want to come in and take that money from the primary healthcare, then let's debate that, and then let's vote, and then I'll have all the information I need to make my decision at that deferment. But as I say, I think a contribution to primary healthcare, because otherwise we'll set precedents that primary healthcare probably will really struggle to get the funding for the second doctor surgery, which is corporate priority.
And just refer to Tom.
Thank you, Chair. So it's the standing advice really that with any recommendation to or proposal to defer, you do run the risk of non-determination. So the current extension of time for the application is apparently this Friday. So after that point, if the application is not determined, the applicant has a ability and a right to appeal to the inspector to do that. The advice I would give you here is at the moment, the report is based on the viability assessment and is the top line figure of that. So effectively, you're deferring to get more money out of that. I think there's an argument that because the viability assessment already shows what that top line figure is, that may not be a reasonable thing to do. And I have to give you that advice because if they did appeal non-determination and go to an inspector, an inspector may say that's unreasonable. You've got the figures there. You know what that is. There's a late stage review that can be applied. Actually, this isn't a reasonable way to go. And I have to give you that advice, I'm afraid.
Councillor Mason.
Thank you, Chair. I go back to the balance of risk regarding this application. We could lose it all. And I don't think that is a risk that I'm prepared to take.
Councillor Siggy Atherton.
Thank you, Chair.
No.
I think the problem is any money we're going to find, no matter how much or how little, it is going to go back to Leicestershire County Council. So I'm struggling to see the debate because we know the bottom line is any money that is found extra, it's going to go to priority 1 and priority 2. It's not going to go to healthcare. And I know we need it in healthcare because of the liability report.
Councillor Cumbers.
Yeah, I know you've talked about non-determination, but I think the applicant is as anxious to get something together that we're happy with, So, and after all, if the applicant went for non-determination, that doesn't mean to say he's going to get it. It doesn't mean to say he's going to get his permission.
I was going to say, just making sure we've got a proposal to defer, which has been seconded, is what the actions are, and that action is to negotiate with who. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm going to put it in your hands, Chair, because I do think you and the officers, I'm sure you can do it, and it is to get an amount. I've talked about 70% in here, to negotiate with NCHA, the agent, who I think are really good people and have worked with the council really well in the past. I think if this was determined in a few weeks, we all know it's going to come back, and I think it would get permitted and a round of applause from everyone. And I think the agent will know that. That all said is, I think to involve the ICB would be really, really useful. And because I think dialogue needs to happen to them so they understand the pressures on the council as well. And I know everyone keeps saying about the SPD document and any policies, the decision maker is allowed to, if other reasons determine elsewhere, to go out that way. And the reason being is for a whole equality purpose. And I want to make sure the equalities of the site have access to primary health care.
Okay, Tom, just before I put it to the vote.
Yep, sorry, I'm just going to give some final sort of advice. So when LCC looked at this scheme and when their contributions team look at that, they obviously make an assessment of the amount that they think is required based on whatever mass that is. We know that equates to about 1.2 million. So if more money was found in accordance with the SPD, that would have to go for that priority 1 first. That would now mean the county council turning around and saying, we don't want that extra money. Or you need to get over that 400k to find anything for those next priorities. I think that's quite unlikely. The other thing that I would add is I think, and Andrew, I'll invite you to come in on this point specifically. I think Andrew went to the independent viability assessor and asked the question about if the tenure was changed, would that be enough to make that shortfall? Because that's one thing that has come up before. And I think the answer was no, there wouldn't be enough within that play to be able to do that. So unless LCC are going to turn around and say, we don't want that money, but then that would question why they gave that amount originally, you're going to need to find over 400,000. And I think the information has already been provided that that isn't going to happen. So that is the.
Can I just go to Councillor Ian Atherton first?
So while I'm mindful that accepting the proposal as written, not as proposed and seconded by Councillor Higgins and Councillor Cumbers, I think the conclusion I'm coming to is actually we need to review the SPD, which is outside the terms of reference of this committee, and certainly reorganise the priorities and maybe reword it in such a way that priority 1 doesn't get everything it asked for before we look at priority 2 and lower priorities. But I that definitely is outside the remit of the people in this room, but I think it is something somehow that we need to take forward.
I fully agree, and that's what I said earlier, that I think we need to review. Okay, I do feel we need to get to the proposal, but if you, Councillor Grant.
Yes, I think you've hit the nail on the head there, Councillor Atherton. We have what we have in front of us. It is not ideal, I have to admit, because when this was drafted, we didn't think we'd be in the position that we are today. And I don't think this is the only matter that will come to committee. There'll be others following. But we have to deal with what we've got. And I really can't agree with my fellow members next to me, even though this is unheard of, but I can't agree. If we do get any extra money, it will go straight to Leicestershire County Council. That is the reality of it. I think the developer, I think the sort of viability is what it is. There's £799,000 on offer after we've gone through our own viability on this matter. And it will go to Leicestershire County Council because of priority 1. So we do need to look at the SPD going forward. It is it's a supplementary planning document. It's not actually policy, is it? So it is a recommendation, but we don't always follow policies because the affordable housing exceeds our policies anyway. So, but it is a recommendation, and I'm very committed to following it at the moment. But I think we just have to accept what it is today. There's nothing we can do about it now, but it's something to bear in mind going forward, because this problem will not go away.
Yeah, I fully agree, but I do want to try and get to some sort of vote, but Tom.
Yeah, sorry, just a very quick one, just to go back on that point. So SPDs, the way they're described is putting the meat on the bones of the policy, but it is clear in the planning regime they are material considerations. So yes, they're not the same as a policy, but they add the meat and the bones to that, and they have to be considered. We always talk about planning as a framework at national and local plan level, and this forms part of that framework, so they are a consideration.
Councillor Cumbers, and then
a consideration, but we're not bound by them. We're not absolutely bound. In the end, opinion comes to, and I'm sure behind the scenes, when you look and whenever there's a law, there are 2 ways of looking at it. You know, I'm sure something can be worked out.
Can I come back down to Councillor Higgins to define the proposal, and then we can actually put that forward to a vote?
So first of all, thanks to officers and particularly members, because and I think, as members have said, it's a very difficult decision, and I think for anyone watching or how this is reported, these aren't easy for decision makers, and it's not easy to throw away any Section 106, because we hear it, we see it in our communities where people just go, well, don't build the houses if we're not going to get the infrastructure. It's a huge national debate. That all said, at the very least, and however the vote goes, I think we are trying to try and find that funding, particularly for primary healthcare. And the reason for the deferment is I believe there can be something and goodwill to secure something for the ICB. And if we have good primary healthcare and access to primary healthcare, it helps reduce social care impacts, which also impacts other authorities. So that's the reason why I'm looking for the deferment. And I hope if there is any money, I hope other authorities and proposals do have the grace to support the ICB in that. Just a very little.
So can I just clarify? Your proposal is to defer the decision
to defer
with the basis to go and look for
yes
extra cash.
Yes, 70%, which is less than the 70%.
But it can't be, because what we're saying is that it needs to break the top of the balance before it starts
No,
moving
that's
away
not
from
gonna-
Leicester County
That's not
Council
going to be
to
my
the
proposal. So
ICB.
my proposal is specifically for that, and I'm tasking that to be found for the ICB. So that's my proposal.
Is that all right, Tom? Is that all right?
That
Is
I'm
that
asking.
all right to make a proposal like that?
I just need clarity what the 70% relates. 70% of what? Sorry.
So to find 70% of the request from the ICB, and that's my proposal.
So the proposal is to go away and see if an extra amount of, so 70% of whatever the ICB's proposal was. Now, for you to guarantee that, that amount will need to be the 400k plus 70%, or are you just saying to see if there's an additional 70% of that figure and then to bring it back here?
Yeah, I'm thinking 70% of that figure, then and then to bring it back here. Now, if obviously other partners then want that money, then that's obviously for
And
another
then
debate.
because I didn't just before I come back to you, Councillor Mason, who is next. What Tom's saying is it has to be the 400,000 before we get to the ICB. We cannot say you're taking that part out of it as a separate piece.
Sorry, that's not quite right. I think what Councillor Higgins is proposing is that we go, it's deferred to see if 70% of the ICB figure can be found, and then to put that to the county council to see whether they will accept the ICB taking that amount and not the county council. Is that correct?
To try and secure at least 70%, which is less than 75, it could be less money, something for the ICB. And however then everyone wants to divvy it up and argue over it, then let's debate that one.
Okay, can we then, we have a proposal to defer the decision with the task to try and find that. Can I take the vote to accept that proposal? Against? Sorry, the proposal hasn't changed, so I didn't. Okay, I can take it back. Sorry. Would you still like to second the proposal, the change proposal?
No, I would just like a straightforward deferral and for discussion.
Okay, so we now have a different proposal, which is just a straight deferment with no conditions. We understand what's being asked for, so it's a straight deferment. So is that okay?
The only reason is if it's a general deferment, I don't want a deferment to be used against the council, where at least if I'm proposing a reason for deferment, it protects the council that we weren't being unreasonable for the deferment. Is that?
Perhaps if it was more vague, so to see if there was additional money that could be used for the ICB purpose, so deferred subject to that purpose, would you accept that proposal, Councillor Higgins? So
yeah,
a deferment to if there's more money for the ICB purpose without using the 70%.
Yeah.
So you accept that, and then Councillor Cumbers, do you accept that as to second? Yeah, so it's to defer the matter to see whether there is additional funding that can be used towards the ICB contribution.
I'm still inclined really to leave it more of a grey area, you know, that things can be tweaked, can't they? And I mean, I think there are perhaps ways of
but that would give us the same effect. You know, what we're just saying is leaving it almost in a grey area to say we were trying to find different ways. Yeah.
You're still open to the same risks as deferment. I think everybody in the room is clear of the purpose to defer.
Okay, so yeah, we have a proposal that's been made. Do we have a seconder? Second by Councillor Cumbers, proposed by Councillor Higgins. In that case, can we vote for this proposal? Those for this proposal? Okay. Those against? And abstain. Yeah. Councillor Higgins asked for his vote to be recorded, and Councillor Cumbers asked for her vote to be recorded as well as in favour. So the motion fails. Do we have any other proposals? We have the recommendation to accept. Would anybody like to, Councillor Gordon?
Yes, I'll propose. Yeah, because I think overall this is the best way to go. So I propose to go with the officer's recommendation.
Do we have a seconder?
Seconded.
In that case, then can we take the proposal to accept the recommendation by the officers? Those for? Against? Abstain? So the motion is carried. And then record the votes of Councillor Higgins and Councillor Cumbers as objecting to that proposal. Just before we go, I know the applicant, it's been difficult, and the applicant, and this is outside of planning, if they were generous, they may wish to listen to this conversation. But thank you everybody for their attendance this evening, and thank you, and a Merry Christmas if we don't see you again. Thanks you very much. I'll close this meeting.